I'd now like to introduce you to our third and final speaker for the evening, Conor Kerley. Conor received his bachelor's degree in human nutrition and dietetics from Trinity College Dublin in 2010. He commenced nutritional research studies at Connolly Hospital and the National Children's Hospital with the School of Medicine at UCD and recently completed his PhD. He currently works with the MEDEX programme in the School of Health and Human Performance in DCU and with the Heartbeat Trust, a multidisciplinary heart failure treatment and prevention foundation. In addition, Conor is chairperson of the Scientific and Research Steering Group of the Irish Nutrition Dietetics Institute, and his areas of expertise include heart and lung disease, as well as vitamin D and autoimmune disease. If I could welcome him to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for that, Ava, and thanks for the invitation to MS Ireland and Novartis. So I'm going to speak mostly about nutrition. So if anybody's tweeting live or anything, we have this is my Twitter and my Facebook if anyone's interested in that. But as Eva showed already, we have a huge disparity in multiple sclerosis rates around the whole world, and really the question is why. Is it because of genetics or is it because of environment? But really, some of the best studies we have are that genetics account for about 25% of risk, whereas the environmental factors seem to account for more, be a little bit more important. And really, if you only remember one thing from this evening, or at least from my talk, really remember genes are not your fate. This is really, really important. So we've all heard a lot about sunlight and vitamin D, but it turns out that sunlight may have additional benefits compared to vitamin D alone. And just some general rules of thumb. So about 5 or 10 minutes of sun is enough, a couple of times per week. In general, you want to expose more skin for less time as opposed to less skin for more time. Okay? You never ever want to burn. This is a really important topic. And of course, certain foods which are rich in antioxidants protect the skin from within, for example, berries. So another rule, and I'll just call it here Kerley's rule, is your shadow must be shorter than your body for vitamin D production. So it's a very easy rule of thumb. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, what time of day it is, or how much clothes you are or aren't wearing. If your shadow is really, really long, you're not going to be making any vitamin D. So as I always say, romantic walks on the beach are fine, but they're not going to cut it for vitamin D. Okay, so no vitamin D production. Okay, and of course, if you already have MS, vitamin D deficiency is associated with more severe MS. It does seem like a good idea. But if we talk about vitamin D sources, so I'm a dietitian, we can get all nutrients from food, right? Not really, not when it comes to vitamin D. So we have over here, we have Swiss cheese, liver, egg, cereals, fortified milks, then you come into some of the oily fish, and this is the recommended daily allowance. And this is a typical supplement of 2,000 units, so you can see really, you're going to have to eat quite a lot of fish and about maybe 100 eggs, well, maybe not 100, but quite a lot of eggs to get enough, okay? But if we put that into context, what about sunlight? So now we see the same graph, so you've got, oh, sorry, I can't figure this pointer out. We've got all the same sources. This is the recommended daily allowance, this is the supplement, and this is sunshine. How much sunshine? 20 minutes will get you this amount. If you've got Caucasian skin, 20 minutes if you're in a swimming suit, okay? And remember Kerley's rule, short shadow, okay? So all vitamins from diet, as I say, I'm a dietitian, with one exception, and that's vitamin D, unless, of course, you eat a lot of fish. But it does have to be a lot of fish, okay? It's not going to be enough to eat a small portion of fish here and there. Okay, but I really want to talk about dietary patterns in MS. So this is a study, a nice study done in 20 different countries, published in the 70s, late 70s, and we still don't really hear a lot about things like this. So MS severity, so how severe someone's MS was associated with all these products. So meat, eggs, butter, full of saturated fat, sugar, empty calories, milk again, a lot of saturated fat in there, and then total fat intake as well. So very interesting. If we fast forward about 20 years, this is a big, large study done in the US. Again, we see the same thing. So high meat consumption, a diet low in fish, where we get omega-3s, and high in dairy products, again, associated with MS. So if we look on to the next year, this is one of the largest studies ever done, 36 countries. And again, we see our saturated fat, animal fats were linked with MS severity, so how severe someone's MS is. Again, another study this time from Canada. Again, you can see the factors, animal fat, excess calories. So in other words, eating more calories than you need. And again, vegetable protein, obviously we can only find that in plant sources, so beans, grains, nuts, seeds. Fibre again, as I always say, the rule of fibre is you're only going to find fibre in plant products, and it's whole plant products. You're not going to find any in sugar or refined flour or things like croissants, but you'll find lots in fruits and vegetables, beans, grains, nuts, things like this. Vitamin C again, mostly from fresh fruits and vegetables, and potassium again, mostly from your fruit, veg, some in dairy and some in whole grains as well. So this was a nice study done a couple of years back in Croatia, again associated with a diet rich in meat and fat. You can see how consistent some of the studies are really showing. This is a really interesting study. What they did was, unfortunately, these people with MS had died of whatever reason. This is back in the 60s. So they looked at the analysis of the brains. They saw that the people with MS had more saturated fats in their brain cells. So have you ever heard of you are what you eat? Maybe it is true. Same thing shown, more saturated fat in the blood cells, so higher saturated fat and lower omega-3s in the blood cells of people with MS compared to those who didn't have MS. And again, this one's shown higher saturated fat was associated with worse outcomes. So the more saturated fat, the more disabled you're likely to become. So we have to look at some intervention studies, and this means where we get people to change their diet, and what effect does that have. Okay, so this is a really nice study, the ARM study done in the UK, and they recruited 83 people and asked every single person to do the same thing: decrease saturated fat, increase polyunsaturated fat, which we get in things like nuts and seeds, and increase antioxidants again from fruits and vegetables. And they studied them over 3 years, and what they found was those who complied with the recommendations did not get any worse within the 3-year period, but those who got the advice but didn't stick to the advice got worse, significantly worse, over that 3-year period. And again, this is in 87 when there wasn't a huge amount of MS drugs available. So most people will have heard of Roy Swank. I'm going to talk a little bit about his studies. So he really was looking at a protocol looking at 15 grams of saturated fat per day. Okay? Anybody know what that looks like, 15 grams a day? So you're talking 3 or 4 pats of butter. So you know you get the little pats of butter in the hotels and stuff? Most people, especially in Ireland, tend to use a lot more butter than just one for one slice of bread or whatever it is. Half a small pork chop. Okay? Anybody take half a chop? No, most people would have at least 1 or maybe 2. And that's just one meal. Again, cheese, about 2.5 matchboxes. Think of the little size of a matchbox, 2.5 of those. Or a pint of milk. Now, most people in Ireland have some milk throughout the day, have some cheese, have some butter, have some fatty meats, and all of a sudden you're up at 60 grams of saturated fat. So way exceeding this 15-gram limit. Okay, so this just shows, what Swank was talking about. But his study, some of you might be aware of some of the intricate details. So 144 patients. He started this study in 1954. I certainly wasn't born then. So he split people into 2 groups. Again, he asked everyone to follow the same diet, those who stuck with the diet and those who didn't. And he published the results over and over again in some of the best medical journals, New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, and others as well. And these are some of his results after 34 years. Now, I'm a researcher. I do some research. Some of my research lasts hours, some of it lasts weeks, and some of it lasts months. 34 years is a huge undertaking, and even some of the data that Eva presented shows maybe results after 5 or 10 years, but 34 years is a huge undertaking. Sorry, that slide should not be there. So this is the percentage of people who are physically active after 34 years. 97% of those who stuck with the diet were still active after 34 years, whereas with those who didn't comply with the diet, only 7%. Okay? And again, this is the death rate, and again, 0% in those who stuck with the diet compared to those who didn't stick with the diet, 63%. Okay? So we actually published a 50-year follow-up, so 50 years. We have to remember that most people in this study were maybe in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So someone in their 40s is now in their 90s when he's following them up. And you can see that 13 of the 15 that he was able to track down were still active. We're still active, and you can see that some of them had really nice skin. So maybe the diet's good for the skin as well. Okay? So Swank says, consistent with what Eva said, that the results are best for those who start with minimum disability. So again, really, really important to target MS as soon as possible. But crucially, regardless of level of disability, those with good compliance did not deteriorate significantly. So even if someone hasn't had a good diet or lifestyle up till now, it's never too late to change. We can control some of the future, perhaps. Swank wrote that high sensitivity to fat suggests that animal fats are directly involved in the genesis of multiple sclerosis, and genesis meaning the beginning. Okay? So Swank seems to be remarkable. He recorded the first ever study of diet in MS, and everybody thought he was crazy at the time. He lost a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues because of this. His study lasted 50 years. That's unbelievable. I could not imagine designing a study now to last for 50 years, published when I'm turning 80. Okay? Swank lived to be 99. So whatever he's doing is probably a good idea. He worked as a scientist till he was 94. Again, I hope I'm not working when I'm 94. So this is a US radiologist, and he wrote in 2012 that Swank's results remain the most effective treatment for MS ever reported. So we don't really hear about this. And of course, Swank's results do have some criticisms, which are really important, but it's just important to note that even so, really, really effective. And again, some of you will know about George Janelek's results from Australia, the Overcoming MS group. Major hope. So what he did was he recruited people 5 days, he brought them into a home and they stayed there for 5 days, and it was specifically for people with MS. And they promoted lifestyle changes. So he studied 165 people, and they just completed questionnaires after 1 year, at the start, after 1 year, and after 5 years. And again, what you can see is, after 1 year, people got better in terms of their overall quality of life, mental health, and physical health, and you can see this kept getting better over 5 years. So again, really, really good evidence. And some of these people were on medication, some weren't. Some were newly diagnosed, and some had MS for a long time. So some nice evidence from Australia. And Prof. Jelinek himself says some people didn't get better, and some people didn't stick to the recommendations at all. But on the other hand, some people got dramatically better, so they had complete resolution of symptoms and are completely well. So again, this is major, major hope. And what are the lifestyle modifications? Some of you will have heard of this. So a plant-based diet full of, again, we said whole grains, nuts, beans, grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables, omega-3 fats, sunshine and vitamin D, meditation, exercise and medication. But not everybody was on medication. So can nutrition work? Yes, and how? Through antioxidants, increased brain blood flow, the microbiome, immune system, and decreasing inflammation as well. So quick recap of the evidence. Do not smoke. Smoking is related to higher risk of MS, and it's also related to higher risk of your MS getting worse quicker. Okay, so really good evidence. So no puffing, please. Keep your immune system balanced to reduce infection risk by following these factors: eating well, sleeping well, physically active, not smoking, and vitamin D levels. Try to avoid stress. Make sure you get enough vitamin D in your blood. This is something really simple that we can all do. And where can we get vitamin D from? Oily fish is really the only worthwhile dietary source. Again, vitamin D supplements and sun. Unfortunately, we're not going to get any sun in Ireland for another couple of months. Look for vitamin D3 as opposed to vitamin D2. And how do you know you're getting enough? Your doctor can test you, and the test is called 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and aim for a blood level at least above 80 nanomoles per litre. Be physically active. So if anyone can't read, the cartoon says, what fits your busy schedule better? Exercising for 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? And really, exercise is that important, and that's been shown across multiple diseases, and including in those without disease. And it's been shown in Ireland by Susan Coote from the University of Limerick, which is partially funded by MS Ireland as well. When it comes to nutrition, decrease your saturated fat, particularly overall fat and particularly saturated fat. Try to increase omega-3 from green veggies, flaxseed, walnuts and oily fish. Increase your fruit and veg. Try to replace fatty meats with beans, nuts and little oily fish like salmon, sardines. Avoid high-fat dairy and try to achieve a healthy weight. Before you make any changes, speak to a healthcare professional. Really important, so if you cut something out, that you're not missing out on anything. And I just want to finish off this evening with a case study. So we have a 15-year-old boy, near 2002, admitted to A&E with almost total left-sided paralysis. So you'll be familiar with all these scans: CT scan, MRI scan, lumbar puncture, and treated with steroids. 3 months later, we got facial paralysis and treated with anti-epileptic medication. Another couple of months later, we have another MRI with another relapse and treated with steroids again. So 3 relapses, 8 months, plus the clinical findings, diagnosis of relapse and remitting multiple sclerosis. So shortly after diagnosis, interferon therapy was started, which is one of the injectables, but this continued after 4 months because of discomfort. However, upon discontinuation, comprehensive lifestyle changes were made. So that was in 2003. 13 years later, this boy is still medication-free, still relapse-free, and still symptoms-free, and that is, of course, me. So I'd like to finish by inviting any questions from the floor, and I'll leave you with my slide with some of my interpretation of the evidence. So thank you. Do we have any questions? Yeah?
So are you suggesting being vegetarian, this person with MS?
I think certainly the best evidence we have is that a plant-based diet is really is a smart choice, and that's really for most people, and that's consistent with some of the best evidence we have in cardiovascular disease and cancer as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be fully vegetarian, but certainly plant-based and whole plants. We can be a vegetarian, live off crisps and donuts and.
So is the animal fats kind of where you're considering fat included with fish? Fats being fish as well? Are you talking about putting in fishes?
Well, some of the best evidence we have is that oily fish is good, but oily fish still contains quite a lot of saturated fat. So the jury, in my opinion, is still out a little bit, but oily fish would certainly be a lot better than a steak, for example. Okay? Yeah.
I did a multiple nutritionist, I did not a detox, clinical exclusion diet.
Yeah.
I knew I was already told to leave because I get really bad reflux.
Yeah.
But after doing the exclusion thing, I also discovered that I have an intolerance to dairy. I looked at my vitamins and I didn't have their right. As soon as I get the dairy, then I went. But I'm kind of nervous because of what, like calcium and stuff like that. So, like, what should I be doing to replace? Like, I've taken dairy out of my diet almost completely.
Yeah. So the question is, if someone follows an exclusion diet and eliminates wheat and dairy, that what they need to consider. So I can't really provide individual advice to anybody. I don't know your own history and your own habits and so on. But I mean, there's lots of different sources of calcium in the diet. It doesn't have to be dairy. And also things like vitamin D are going to be important. And there's lots of other things apart from calcium which are important for our bones. So there's a lot of different ways. So for example, like sesame seeds, chickpeas, certain fruits and vegetables will have a lot of calcium in there as well. Okay? So, so the question is a gluten-free diet advisable? And really, we don't have any good evidence for that at the moment. There is some interesting papers, but we don't have enough evidence at the minute to say that it is beneficial. On the other hand, we can say that it's probably not going to be too harmful. But if someone enjoys gluten, I certainly enjoy gluten from time to time, and I don't think it's a major problem for most people. But if someone feels they would rather not eat gluten for whatever reason, that's a different thing. But we don't have the evidence at the moment. Okay, I think just the next one. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is about tin fish, are they as good for us as fresh? And again, it depends on the context. In general, the best dietetic advice we have is to try and go for as fresh and as whole as possible. So tinned would be a little bit processed, but in general, the tin fish, like as you say, sardines and mackerel and so on, they can be very good choices, and they can be quite cheap and quite convenient. They will still contain vitamin D, but just be careful. In Ireland, we eat a lot of tin tuna, and there will be no vitamin D in the tin tuna. So things like sardines and mackerel will have the vitamin D. Okay, I think this will. Yeah.
So you saying to everybody that it should change over to this diet without any question, like almost plant-based with some fish?
No, I'm presenting the evidence. So I don't know anybody's own circumstances and own medical conditions and history and so on. So I'm not providing anybody with advice. I'm providing the best evidence that we have at the moment.
So that's the evidence you're saying is plant-based diet?
Well, I haven't gone through it all, but that's a quick 15-minute synopsis of a quick snapshot. Yeah.
Is there any downside apart from electric gas?
So, I mean, if someone switches over, if someone eliminates anything from the diet, they need to be careful that they don't miss out on anything important. But, I mean, there's no reason why a plant-based diet will provide everything that we need as well. I'm just behind. Yeah, the lady at the back. Yeah, you. So there are some studies showing that sugar is correlated with a worse outcome, but we don't have as much evidence as we would for animal fats just yet. But I mean, we would probably expect that it would have as bad effect, but we don't have that evidence. It's not that strong. Sorry. So the question is about watching your blood sugar levels in general. And I think that's I don't think there's a need for anybody who's not diabetic to be testing their blood sugars, but I do think it's important that we all, like, our blood sugar level should never be up and down all day, every day anyway, and that goes for if we've MS or not. Yes?
For persons at sanity, if they like the odd steak, or they like the odd crab, is it okay to have a slow day, in your opinion, because of the shifted benefit emotionally?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think really it comes down to the individual circumstances, and I'm going to reference a guy from America called Dean Ornish, and he speaks about a spectrum. And basically, if someone has really severe disease or whatever it is, whether it be cancer or diabetes or heart disease or MS, that really the best evidence we have in all of those diseases is to be as strict as possible with medications, with exercise, with diet. But if someone is quite healthy and is looking to stop progression of either getting a disease or that disease getting worse, that they have a lot more leeway. But at the same time, as you say, it's about weighing it up. I know a lot of people who follow the Overcoming MS program, and can be quite miserable because they're quite restricted, and I think that's wrong as well. Yeah, I usually say that. Yeah, maybe we can write off a. So the question is, maybe we can write off. We can ask the government for 3 holidays a year. Yeah, so maybe we can write it off as a medical expense. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we need to set up a support group or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I was isolated as well. She told me to go back to Hong Kong there, so in a few weeks, so I grew up, and then I read it to go together.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to follow this diet, and again, it does take a lot of discipline. So what's been happening is when you're putting it, like, obviously it's like an alternative. I'm finding that a lot of the alternatives are quite sugar-based as well. You know, so it's kind of like that MS thing on Saturday as well, and the nutritionist and everything she was suggesting, he said, well, that's just what sugar. And we were told, well, you know, if you have MS, don't worry about diabetes. You know, it's kind of
So the question is basically that if we start cutting out a lot of these foods, that a lot of the replacements have a lot of sugar or maybe other additives. So yeah, you're completely right, and it is very tricky. What I will say to kind of a vulnerable and curious audience maybe, to be careful who you get your nutritional advice from, particularly online in a magazine or anything like this, or down the gym or down the pub even. That really the only people in Ireland that's just come out really in the last week or two that are qualified to give nutritional advice are dietitians. So not a nutritionist, a dietitian, and that's particularly important when it comes to a medical condition, because with a medical condition, it's complicated by a lot of different factors and of course medications as well. So just to be careful where you get your information from. Now, if we talk about specific alternatives, what I would say first of all is that if you're looking to cut out maybe meat, that instead of maybe always looking to replace it with a fake meat or something that mimics the meat, that just look for other alternatives in your diet. So instead of having a spaghetti bolognese with mince in there, you might have a spaghetti bolognese with extra vegetables and maybe some lentils, and you leave out the mince altogether. And some of these alternatives certainly can be really high in sugar and salt and maybe even fats as well. So it is really important to keep that in mind. Falafel? Yeah, falafel can be a good alternative as well. I think, have we got time for one more? One last final question. So this lady waiting patiently. Your children. So again, I can't really advise anybody, and unfortunately, when it comes to vitamin D, I've done several vitamin D studies, and the response is so varied. And really, we can say this for nearly any intervention, that the response is really very varied. I've just finished last year a study actually looking at children with autism, and we give them 2,000 units per day, and some children's levels shot up and some increased slightly, but some children decreased. So isn't that amazing? We give them 2,000 units and we're pretty confident they took it. We assessed how much they took, and at some people's levels, some children's levels decreased. So that's the importance of assessing, taking a blood sample. So with a child, I would recommend, liaising with your GP or with your consultant and then titrating the dose. So you have a look at maybe after 2 or 3 months on that dose, is it enough? And me personally, I take vitamin D in the winter, but not in the summer. I try to get my sunlight. And the same will go for kids, and I say 5 or 10 minutes is more than enough. And just one last comment before Ava comes up. There is some recent evidence from Bruce Hollis and his group in North Carolina showing that the response to vitamin D supplements is blunted in people with MS. In other words, someone with MS does not increase their vitamin D level the same as someone without MS. So again, this is the reason why testing is important. But I would recommend you start your supplements for maybe a couple of months and then you test, as opposed to testing before your supplements. Okay? So thank you very much again, everybody.
Conor, thank you very much again. Very clear, very informative, very practical, slightly challenging, I suppose, to all of us. But thank you again, Conor, for your presentation. All that's left for me to say is to thank our 3 speakers, Nani, Eva and Conor, again for really, really engaging presentations. Also, huge thanks to Novartis for supporting this evening. It was all available to people and will be available on MS Ireland's website. So to thank each and every person here in the room for physically attending, and thank anyone who's online as well for joining us this evening. So on behalf of MS Ireland, thank you very much for coming. The MS Ireland services are always available to people. Again, I would say to go on the website, there are local services available to you, whether it's individual one-on-one with the community worker or whether it's some of our respite services. That's all available to anybody with MS. So thank you again for coming. Safe home and Gurmil Magot Sonawaya.